The southern U.S. border, once a place of steady crossings and routine patrols, was suddenly overwhelmed by a surge no one saw coming. What had been a predictable flow of people seeking new lives quickly transformed into a humanitarian crisis of historic proportions. In just a matter of days, a manageable stream of migrants became a desperate swelling crowd, families clutching children, young people traveling alone, and individuals from every corner of the Americas. Many had heard rumors that the window to cross was closing, fueling a sense of urgency and panic. The air was thick with anxiety, as people waited for hours, sometimes days, under the relentless sun, hoping for a chance at safety and opportunity. Border Patrol agents, already stretched thin, struggled to keep up with the sheer numbers. Makeshift camps sprang up almost overnight, with tents and tarps offering little protection from the elements. Resources, food, water, medical care ran dangerously low, and the sense of order began to fray. Aid groups and volunteers rushed to the scene, distributing water, food, and blankets, but their efforts, though heroic, barely made a dent in the overwhelming need. The scale of the crisis was simply too great for any one group to manage. News cameras arrived, broadcasting images of exhaustion, hope, and heartbreak into living rooms across the country. The border, once a distant line on a map, became a national flashpoint, its struggles and stories impossible to ignore. The reasons behind the surge were as complex as the people themselves. Economic collapse, political unrest, and violence in home countries pushed many to leave everything behind. Smugglers and traffickers exploited the chaos, spreading misinformation and false promises, making the journey even more perilous. For countless migrants, the United States represented more than just a destination. It was a last hope, a place where dreams of safety, stability, and a future for their children might finally become reality. The border was a line between despair and possibility. Inside processing centers, the situation grew dire. Overwhelmed officials worked around the clock, but the facilities were never designed for such numbers. Paperwork piled up, tempers flared, and warnings to Washington grew more urgent. The system was at a breaking point, and something had to give. Across the United States, the crisis sparked fierce debate. Some watched with empathy, others with fear or anger. Protests erupted in city streets, and conversations about immigration, security, and compassion dominated the national discourse. The country was anxious, divided, and searching for answers. The chaos at the border was no longer just a local issue. It had become America's urgent dilemma, demanding attention, action, and above all, humanity. In Washington, the border crisis dominated headlines, capturing the attention of lawmakers, journalists, and citizens alike. Every major news outlet ran urgent stories, and the sense of alarm was palpable across the Capitol. The issue quickly became the focal point of heated debates, with politicians on both sides of the aisle scrambling to respond to the growing sense of emergency. Inside the White House, the crisis overshadowed all other priorities. Staffers worked late into the night, drafting memos and preparing for high-stakes meetings. The administration's daily agenda was rewritten, as the president and his advisors focused almost exclusively on the border situation, searching for a decisive response. President Trump, viewing the surge of migrants as a direct threat to national security, called a series of emergency meetings. He demanded immediate action from his top officials, pressing them for solutions that would send a strong message both at home and abroad. The atmosphere in the West Wing was tense, with urgency mounting by the hour. In a dramatic address from the Oval Office, Trump declared a national emergency. He announced a sweeping and unprecedented measure, a total shutdown of the U.S.-Mexico border to all non-essential travel and a halt to new asylum claims. The president's words echoed across the country, signaling a turning point in U.S. immigration policy. Trump insisted that this was the only way to regain control of the border and protect American sovereignty. He argued that drastic action was necessary to stop what he described as chaos and lawlessness, blaming foreign governments and criminal organizations for fueling the crisis. The closure, he emphasized, would be temporary but absolute. No new asylum seekers would be processed, and anyone caught crossing illegally would be immediately returned. Border gates slammed shut, and patrol agents enforced the new rules with strict orders, leaving many migrants stranded and confused. The administration framed the move as a matter of law and order, with officials pointing to international smuggling networks and failed foreign policies as the root causes of the chaos. The message was clear: the U.S. would no longer tolerate what it saw as a breakdown of its borders. The executive order halted all asylum processing and authorized the swift removal of those who crossed illegally. The administration hoped this would send a powerful deterrent, discouraging future surges and signaling a new era of strict enforcement. Almost immediately, the announcement sparked fierce political and legal battles. Protesters gathered outside courthouses, civil rights groups filed lawsuits, and lawmakers clashed in Congress over the legality and morality of the shutdown. For thousands of migrants waiting at the border, hope quickly turned to fear and uncertainty. Families who had traveled for weeks or months now faced closed gates and the prospect of being sent back, unsure of what the future would hold. Across the nation, communities braced for the fallout of this unprecedented decision. The shutdown sent shockwaves through border towns, businesses, and families, leaving the country to grapple with the consequences of a historic and controversial move. Tom Homan, the administration's new border czar, was tasked with enforcing the shutdown. Known for his hardline stance, Homan coordinated with federal agencies to fortify the border and accelerate removals. Migrants were turned away swiftly, as Homan insisted that only tough enforcement would deter future surges. Supporters praised his no-nonsense approach, seeing him as the right man for a crisis. Critics, however, saw Homan as the architect of harsh, inhumane policies. His leadership became a symbol of the administration's uncompromising approach. The border shutdown, under Homan's direction, was both praised and condemned, deepening the national divide. The border shutdown split the nation, igniting passionate responses from every corner of the country. It was a moment that forced Americans to confront their beliefs about security, compassion, and what it means to be a nation of laws. Supporters hailed it as a necessary step to restore order and protect sovereignty, praising Trump and Homan for decisive action. For them, the shutdown was a long-awaited answer to years of frustration over what they saw as a broken immigration system. They believed strong measures were needed to defend the border, keep communities safe, and uphold the rule of law. They cited economic and security concerns, believing the administration was finally delivering on promises. Many felt that unchecked migration threatened American jobs and resources, and that the government was finally listening to their voices. For these supporters, the shutdown was not just about policy, it was about national identity and the future of the country. Critics, including human rights groups and religious leaders, called the shutdown cruel and illegal, arguing it violated the right to seek asylum. They warned that closing the border would endanger vulnerable people fleeing violence and persecution, and that America's moral standing was at risk. Protests erupted nationwide, with stories of stranded families fueling outrage. Across cities and towns, demonstrators demanded compassion and justice, sharing heartbreaking accounts of children separated from parents and loved ones left in limbo. Aid workers described dire conditions, especially for children and vulnerable migrants. Shelters quickly became overcrowded, and volunteers struggled to provide basic necessities. The humanitarian crisis at the border became a rallying cry for those demanding immediate action and reform. The debate was emotional and fierce, with both sides convinced of their moral high ground. Town halls and community meetings grew tense, as neighbors and families found themselves divided over what was right and what was necessary. The shutdown became a test of America's values: security versus compassion. It forced the nation to grapple with difficult questions about who we are and what we stand for in times of crisis. The nation was left deeply divided, with no easy answers in sight. As headlines clashed and emotions ran high, Americans were left to wonder how or if the country could find common ground again. As the border crisis unfolded, controversy erupted in Washington. Tom Homan's appointment raised conflict of interest concerns due to his consulting work for companies seeking federal contracts. Reports surfaced of an FBI investigation into Homan for allegedly soliciting payments to help companies win contracts under a future Trump administration. The probe was abruptly shut down after Trump took office, sparking accusations of a cover-up. Democrats demanded hearings, while the White House dismissed the scandal as a political attack. The controversy cast doubt on the integrity of border operations and fueled partisan distrust. The Homan investigation became a symbol of the broader battle over power and accountability. The shutdown ignited fierce battles in Congress. Democrats, led by Speaker Jeffries and Senator Schumer, condemned Trump's order as unconstitutional and vowed legal action. Republicans rallied behind the president, framing the shutdown as a necessary security measure. The standoff mirrored the nation's deep divisions, with both sides refusing to budge. State leaders joined the fray, some supporting, others suing to block the policy. The legal fight promised to reach the Supreme Court. Public debate grew toxic, with cable news and social media amplifying outrage. The shutdown became a symbol of America's culture war, touching on identity, security, and morality. Common ground seemed further away than ever. The shutdown's impact was immediate and harsh. Camps on the Mexican side swelled, with families stranded and vulnerable to crime. Aid groups struggled to meet basic needs as conditions worsened. U.S. border communities suffered economically, with cross-border commerce and legal labor disrupted. Federal agencies were stretched thin, and political turmoil threatened broader government functions. The administration touted a drop in arrivals as a victory, but the human cost was undeniable. The crisis was contained, but suffering and division deepened. The border was closed, but the consequences rippled far beyond. Weeks into the shutdown, the nation faced a new reality. The surge had stopped, but a humanitarian crisis festered at the border, and legal battles loomed. The shutdown's future was uncertain, with no end date in sight. Lawsuits challenged the policy's legality, likely heading to the Supreme Court. The shutdown became a defining political issue, hardening partisan lines. America was forced to confront tough questions about security, compassion, and the rule of law. The border was quieter, but the silence was heavy with unresolved issues. The nation and those waiting at the border wondered what would come next.